Hey, Steve, do you have a minute to— Vroom! Astrid paused at the entrance to Steve's private lab as some sort of fireball erupted in the middle of the room. After a moment, the fire and the smoke cleared as she saw Steve standing before various bottles of alchemical substances. He was holding two as if pouring out their contents, but at the moment they were empty, and his face was entirely covered in black soot. Am I interrupting? Do I still have eyebrows? Steve asked, keeping his eyes clenched shut for a moment. I don't think so, Astrid muttered. Then the damage is done. I've got time to talk. He replied and set the bottles down so he could feel around for a cloth to start wiping the black soot off his face. You're sure it's okay? Astrid asked with a worried expression as she stepped further into his lab. Yeah, it's fine. Steve waved it off and then saw her concerned expression. What's wrong? I'm not great at reading faces as it is since Fenrina places so much emphasis on smells, and without eyebrows, your face is weird, she admitted. Hold on. Steve looked around his workbench for a moment before grabbing two fuzzy black squares and slapped them to his face to replace his eyebrows. Does this happen often? She asked. Enough so that I've got a few spares laying around. It's cheaper than constantly wasting the magic to regrow them, Steve admitted. However, as Astrid watched him, his left eyebrow began to crawl up the side of his face. That one is getting away. She pointed. Steve tried to look up but obviously couldn't see his own forehead and had to feel around to grab the eyebrow, pull it off and slap it against the counter a few times as it let out a soft squeal. Then he stuck it back on. Better? He asked. Ear? Astrid watched for several seconds, and it didn't try to escape again. I guess. So what's up? He asked, and began to start shuffling around bottles before finding his papers to note the results of his latest experiment. Astrid couldn't help but notice how many results seemed to be noted as catastrophic. Catastrophic explosion, catastrophic fire, catastrophic planar rift, catastrophic smell, catastrophic nagging by the Archon, catastrophic sense of humor, and catastrophic explosive diarrhea, just to name a few. She'd learned it was better than to ask Steve about how he came by many of his test results. I was hoping to talk to you about me and Fenrina and adventuring, Astrid mentioned. I appreciate you wanting to adventure more with us, but we kinda need Fenrina. You're not exactly, the most qualified applicant. Steve tried to carefully let her down. If this is about the sparring training. Astrid started before Steve waved her off. It's fine, I was able to reattach the toes. They're totally good as new, no matter how much Larry complains that they aren't as gorgeous as before. Whenever he goes on about how certain chicks dig his chocolate's toes. Steve shuddered. But it's not about that exactly anyway. I was thinking, maybe it's time for you to heal us. When she mentioned that, Steve stared at her and she frowned a little at his expression. Are you angry? Oh, right. He slapped his forehead. Confusion. One of the black furry bars arched up to help indicate his confusion. Are you injured? He asked now that his eyebrows were cooperating. No, but I mean, the whole situation with her existing and all that. It's getting a little weird as I'm getting older. Keeping ourselves separate is getting odd. And the stress of watching her battle monsters is kinda intense when all I can do is sit inside her head and watch. Plus, I still sort of have reservations about aiding the cause of an evil nation, Astrid mentioned. Aggrieved. Steve's eyebrows wiggled for a moment, and then one went down while the other went up. Then they reversed positions. Do I look aggrieved? He checked. Sure, Astrid said with a glance at his eyebrows shifting around a bit. Almera isn't evil, he protested then. I mean, the hills around Nomium are covered in crosses these days. The mass slaughter of gnomes seems kinda evil. She frowned and rubbed her arm a little. Mild anger. His eyebrows, now more confident in the emotion, moved into place. Gnomish terrorists! It's not like they're killing civilians. Bandits, murderers, and other such criminals would be killed in other nations just the same. Is it important if they hang from a noose or a cross? Well, there's also the pillaging of the elven cities, she added. Listen, that's just about consistency. If a city is given a chance to surrender and they refuse and must be sieged, what happens when the walls come down is as much their fault as the invaders, Steve insisted. Other nations do it too. Just because other nations do it doesn't mean it's any better, Astrid finally huffed. I know they're your people, and you want to help them, but they kill lots of people. They conquer more territory than any other nation in recent history. I've checked. That's just because we're so good at it, Steve protested. Plus, in exchange for conquering them, we give people roads, clean water, order, and all sorts of other benefits. Well, not the elves, I guess. They already had those. We'll give them democracy. Well, some of them. Mostly the ones who work with us, and any who serve in the legions. What I'm trying to say is that wars between nations aren't really good against evil. It's all super complicated. You don't think I'm evil, right? He tried to change the subject. Concerned. He then added so his eyebrows would shift around into place. No, not really. But, Astrid sighed, I just feel like I would be doing much better if I could be me again. Really me. The Archon offered to let me stay and get a proper education, too. Learning magic? Surprise. He added at the end to get his eyebrows to start spinning around. After a moment, he tried to look up at his own eyebrows as he felt them moving around so quickly. Not that surprised, he growled, so they stopped spinning and stuck in an arched position. Not magic. At least, probably not. I'm not sure I feel it after last time, Astrid muttered. Trust me, accidents like that happen all the time, Stephen assured her. Flat. He added to get his eyebrows into a neutral position. Trust me, being turned into strange animals is like a rite of passage around here. One day I'm sure he'll get his regular brain back and stop scratching at the ground for worms. Nothing to end your career with magic over, he insisted next. Still, I guess if anything I might want to learn more about magic beings, less about casting magic itself, especially the Magiju. I think it's a shame any information about them is so limited and often little more than transcribed legends and rumors, Astrid mentioned. The Magiju? Concern. He let his eyebrows shift a moment. I'd be careful if I were you. They're powerful spirits and known for being fickle, egotistical, and erratic at best. Considering the time I've spent with Doom, I'd like to think I've got plenty of practice in dealing with powerful creatures who are fickle, egotistical, and erratic, Astrid mentioned with a shrug. Think so? Curious. His eyebrows shifted so one could arch up. I wouldn't think we've dealt with too many in a way that you could... Oh. His tone changed as he realized what she meant. You mean us, don't you? Am I that egotistical? Concern. Not in the traditional sense, but you do seem to get upset when someone challenges your abilities, like when you got into the drinking contest with the giant, she reminded him. Which I won. He wagged a finger at her. You also died, she added. It was a mild case of death at worst, and a temporary one at that. He crossed his arms. Still, could you see about maybe healing me? I know you like Fenrina, but I kind of want my own life. She's okay with it, you know, Astrid said, and Steve sighed. Flat. He let his eyebrows flatten out while he leaned against his workbench to think. Yeah, I get it. I know I've been rather selfish about this as it is. I just figured, I don't know, that I'd never have to deal with it, maybe? He shrugged. So I'm sorry I've been shitty. I have actually done some research into the matter, but I've actually hit a dead end. He revealed to her as he walked over to a shelf to grab a folder of notes. Really? What's the issue? Astrid asked as she followed him over. So you don't suffer from traditional lycanthropy, or any thropy for that matter. The library here is poorly stocked with the more advanced and esoteric writings on blood magic as well. Mostly because advanced writings on blood magic are stitched into the flesh of hideous little things that like to eat other books and people, and just about anything, really. The only lead I have is with an older scholar who traveled through what's now Almarin territory but, at the time, was the Talesian Faradam. See, he was fascinated with the process of the breeding between the Jian Sunbinders that ruled at the time and the human generals who came to rule after it got conquered by Frank the fucking Amazing. I still can't believe that's his title. Astrid shook her head. Hey, conquer most of the world, and you too can be named the fucking Amazing. There's a reason there's like 8 Frankvilles, Frankopolis of course, and like a dozen Franks forts. Plus, one place called Hot Dog. Not sure why? I think it's a translation error. Steve shrugged. I mean, he was so successful the gods got all pissy and destroyed the multi-step path and the archways, so his young empire would collapse. Plus, they struck him down at 32 with magic beans. Magic beans? Astrid asked. Yep. Steve nodded slowly. Beans, the magic fruit, the more you eat, the more you shit yourself to death. Dysentery is a shitty way to die. Anyway, my point is I have a lead on where to find more detailed research. The problem is, it's in a library run by some complete and utter tools who I really never ever want to deal with, he revealed. And getting access to the library will be difficult. Isn't it in Almarin territory, you said? What's the issue? Astrid asked. Then she watched his eyebrows start to crawl off since he'd forgotten to order them in around for a bit. Your eyebrows are escaping. Fucking... Steve reached up to grab the eyebrows and slapped them against the workbench a few times. You little shits better knock that off, or so help me I'll glue you back onto the magic ass where I found you, he hissed. Then he caught Astrid's look. Ass as in donkey, not like a magic butt. He coughed then and stuck the eyebrows back to his face once he was confident they'd learned their lesson. Anyway, I'm going to need Fenrina for this. Plus, you might as well get the others. It's time that Spellslinger goes to the gym. I'm really confused, so this is Almarin territory? Fenrina asked as they walked through the very hilly streets of Bexicanis. The werehusky was getting plenty of strange glances, but no one was calling for silver weapons, which was a relief, possibly due to her centurion-like armor. If any nation would make soldiers out of werewolves, it would be Almera after all. Yes, the city predates Alma itself by several centuries. They named it after their first patron god Bexicus, goddess of questions and knowledge. However, the temples to her have been somewhat stymied first by the conquest of city-state by Frank, and later by us Almerans, who have a much heavier emphasis on our worship of war, who needs no other name. Steve mentioned with a nod and a light rub along his recently regrown eyebrows. What's stymied mean? Fenrina asked next. Suppressed? I was trying to say less people worship her around here than they used to, Steve explained. Oh, and what's with the stuff about someone named Ethel that they go on about? Fenrina asked next. The Ethelistic League? So the people around this chunk of the Splintered Sea have lots of regional names for themselves and often associate with whatever city-state they're from. But overall, they all trace their roots to Ethel and call themselves the Ethelites. Though they aren't supposed to, he proclaimed loudly and got a few glares from the passing locals, who he just glared back at. We'll make them into better Almarins one day, he muttered. Why don't they want to be Almarins? Fenrina asked next. They're just stubborn. They claim to be the progenitors of all human civilization, which the elves claim they stole, and they claim just as loudly that if anything, it wasn't stolen but borrowed and then improved upon. So some of them are upset, because they think Almera is just an upstart and that we stole their civilization and culture, which of course we very loudly declared we just borrowed and also improved upon. So loudly, in fact, we came over and conquered them all to prove it, which really proves that we won the argument, Steve explained. And what's with all the columns? Fenrina was noticing the sheer quantities of columns in the local architecture. There's a city nearby that's known for its columns, which we also borrowed and improved upon. You'll soon learn it's a pretty common theme. Us borrowing things from other places and making it better, like arches, roads, clean water, blood sport, conquest, and olive oil, for example, especially olive oil. Don't let the locals fool you. Just because they were first doesn't mean they were best, Steve muttered at the end. I've been meaning to ask, or really Astrid has, and since I'm here I'll ask for her. How come Almera doesn't expand further up? Fenrina glanced over at Steve while they walked. Well, 2 reasons. 1. Much of the land north and west of here is blocked by a massive stretch of desert that's really not of any use, and 2. That desert is filled with dire tarantula hawk wasps. Steve shuddered just at the mention of the name, as did Sherry and Larry. Dire what now? Who stuck so many animals and jammed them all together? Fenrina asked with a frown. They're not some sort of magical abomination created from all 3 species. Steve shook his head. They're all natural as far as I can tell. Just super nasty flying bugs. The normal reaction to being stung by just a normal one is to lie down and cry for a few days. And what's the normal reaction to being stung by the dire ones? Even Fenrina was smart enough to look concerned by now. To lie down and die. Steve shrugged. Though I'm told your dead body will continue to scream for a few hours after the fact. So, that's why you guys are expanding south. Fenrina slowly nodded. Yeah, we'd much rather conquer a bunch of nations than even try and cross that desert. The only place without them is the edge of the Helerin Mountains in the northeast, and those are notoriously treacherous mountains as is, so really we're hemmed in by geography to the north. Steve shrugged, and then waved them forward as they finally crested the hill to stand before his destination in the city. All right to you, I present the Gymnasium of Bexicanus. Before them stood a massive compound of stone structures. Mostly they were open and well appointed with views of the city around them. On the far side was a large library, to the left a large bathhouse, and to the right the old temple to Bexicus. The main feature was the grand courtyard between them, however, built in the style of a forum so that many could come together to debate and discuss whatever they saw fit. But something was wrong. The statues around the temple weren't of Bexicus, and the forum had a lot more grunting going on. Psst! Hey, over here! The party looked to the side to see a man in a dirty robe. Want to buy some carbs? He asked with a worried glance to either side before opening his robe to reveal various breads and rolls hanging from the inside. What? You're the dirtiest baker I've ever seen, Fenrina announced with a giggle. Shh! The man hissed with a finger to his lips. Keep it down! Don't you know they outlawed everything around here they think could despoil their precious gains? The man pointed up at a sign now hanging over the temple formerly dedicated to Bexicus. The Gains Commandments? Fenrina read with a squint. This is the shit I've been hearing about, Steve sighed. They believe there's evil spirits living in certain foods like bread or pastries that's called carbs. They think carbs are evil little gremlins or something that eat upon their flesh. Not just flesh, muscles. The baker nodded. They're crazy. But then some of them will have days where they just go mad and eat everything they can. It's really disconcerting everyone. This place used to be about the study of ideas. Gymnasiums are supposed to be about learning and academics. Now it's just gains, grunting, and who can become the Brolosopher king. The baker muttered. Yes, that's right. The Brolosophers. Well, let's get this over with. Steve sighed and walked forward into the gymnasium. All around they could see men working strange contraptions with weights and ropes. There was also a great deal of grunting. Look at them all! Have you ever seen such big muscles? Sherry gasped out. Or such small loin pouches? Can't be hiding much in those. Steve snickered a bit at the choice clothing of the Brolosophers, who seemed to be wearing as little as possible without actually wearing nothing. See, real Almarans prefer skirts because we like having plenty of room for our big... He trailed off then as Sherry jabbed him in the ribs. Cravings for justice. That really doesn't make any sense, Steve, Fenrina said with a frown as her tongue dangled from the side of her muzzle. It sure does. And there's no reason to ever question that or think about what I meant ever again. Steve coughed. Look at them all lined up, preening like birds. He deflected the attention to a line of the Brolosophers standing before a massive mirror. They were in various poses, some with weights they were lifting, others just seeming to be striking poses at random. Larry feels uncomfortable, Larry muttered as he saw one of the most buff dwarves he'd ever seen. Even the dwarf's beard had muscles, which also had more beards, with smaller yet still defined muscles somehow. How can they get this buff? It doesn't feel natural, Sherry muttered. It sure doesn't. I sense powerful faggotry at work here. Steve agreed with a suspicious glare around the gymnasium. Powerful what? Fenrina asked as she looked back, tongue flopping around as she turned her head. Well, a faggot is a bundle of sticks, so one little stick is weak, but a bunch together is strong. This whole place reeks of weak things banding together. Steve explained. But why wouldn't that be a good thing? Fenrina scratched her head in confusion. Not in this context. Normal people coming together to form a stronger society? Sure. These guys? No. Not these fags. Steve shook his head. By now they were getting close to the center stage where a number of the burlosophers had gathered. Behold the peak of human male performance, one man declared and struck a pose. Well, behold the peak of orc male performance. An orc then followed up and struck a pose as well. No! Behold the peak of gnome male performance. A gnome clad in about as much cloth as a napkin then stepped before the others to strike a pose.